Let me tell you something right now. Just because he's acting like he doesn't care doesn't mean he's not thinking about you. In fact, the silence, the distance, that's not power, that's confusion. He's wrestling with emotions he won't admit. And you're over there wondering if you ever mattered. Trust me, you did. But now it's not about what he feels. It's about what you're going to do with the truth. When someone pulls back and starts acting like they don't care, especially in the middle of emotional tension or after a breakup, the knee-jerk reaction is to believe them, to assume their silence means detachment. But that's not always the truth. In fact, in many cases, silence doesn't equal indifference. It's a defense mechanism. It's how some people cope when they don't have the emotional tools to handle what they're actually feeling. And for many men, this is exactly what's going on beneath the surface. You have to understand something about emotional conditioning, especially in men. From a young age, most boys are taught, directly or indirectly, that showing emotions like hurt, sadness, fear, or even deep affection can be seen as weak. Vulnerability gets shut down. So when they grow into men and experience complex emotions, heartbreak, guilt, longing, confusion, they often don't know what to do with them. Instead of leaning in, they shut down. They push it away. They pretend they don't care because pretending is easier than processing. So now you're dealing with a guy who's acting cold. He's not reaching out. He's not texting you. He's not chasing. He's moved into silence. And it feels like rejection. But the truth is the silence might be a form of emotional self-protection. He doesn't want to deal with what he's really feeling because what he's really feeling could be painful. Maybe it's regret. Maybe it's anger at himself. Maybe it's confusion because he didn't expect to miss you the way he does. Or maybe deep down he knows he messed up and he has no clue how to fix it. But rather than face any of that, he does what he's always done, shut down and detach. That detachment isn't always real, it's learned. And here's the catch, he might even believe his own act. That's how deep this defense mechanism goes. He convinces himself he's fine, that you didn't matter as much as you did, that walking away was necessary, that silence is strength. And it's not until time passes and that silence stretches out longer than he expected that the cracks start to show. He starts to wonder if you've really moved on, if you actually meant it when you said you were done. And when those thoughts start creeping in, that's when his emotional conflict begins, because now he's dealing with something he spent his whole life avoiding, his feelings. The longer you stay silent, the louder his thoughts become. But remember, you're not seeing that. All you see is the calm surface, the blank expression, the lack of effort. And it's easy to believe that means he doesn't care. But silence is complicated. Silence can be power, but it can also be fear. It can be avoidance, and it can absolutely be emotional paralysis. So when he's acting like he doesn't care, you have to ask yourself, is this truly who he is, or is this how he survives uncomfortable emotions? Because a man who lacks emotional maturity will always retreat when he's forced to confront feelings he doesn't understand. That doesn't mean you chase him. That doesn't mean you break your silence to make him feel better. This isn't about soothing him. It's about seeing clearly. So many people misread emotional shutdown as strength or indifference, when in reality, it's often a mask for emotional overwhelm. He doesn't know how to engage, so he avoids. He doesn't know how to admit he's hurting, so he acts like he's not. He doesn't know how to ask for clarity, so he pretends not to need it. And what's worse, we often internalize this behavior. We make it mean something about us, that we weren't enough, that we weren't loved, that we weren't worth fighting for. But in reality, his silence says more about his inner world than your value. What you're seeing isn't a man who doesn't care. You're seeing a man who doesn't know how to care out loud. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does explain it. And when you understand the why, you stop taking it so personally. He's thinking about you way more than he'll ever admit. That's the part you don't see. And honestly, it's the part he doesn't want you to know. Because if you knew the truth, that you still live in his mind, that he replays conversations, that he wonders what you're doing and who you're with, you'd realize the power you hold. And that scares him more than anything. See, most men aren't wired to openly express deep emotions, especially when they feel like they've lost control. Vulnerability for them is risky. It's uncomfortable. It requires a level of honesty that many haven't practiced. And when a relationship ends or hits a rough patch, their instinct isn't to open up, it's to shut down. He may not say your name. He may not talk to his friends about you. He might not be texting you or liking your photos, but he's thinking constantly, quietly. In those moments when the world gets quiet, late at night, driving alone, in between work tasks, there you are. You show up. Your laugh, your last message, your scent, the way you looked when you turned away. It comes in waves, some strong, some small, but they come. And when they do, he doesn't always have the words to process them. So he buries them deep. He convinces himself he's fine, but the more he tries to suppress it, the more it lingers. What people often don't realize is that emotional processing doesn't always look dramatic. It's not always tears and breakdowns. Sometimes it looks like silence, like someone zoning out at work, like impulsive decisions, like acting colder than usual. That's what's happening. He's caught in this inner storm of thoughts he doesn't fully understand or want to confront. He doesn't know how to say, I miss her. He doesn't know how to admit that he's hurting because he's supposed to be okay. He's supposed to be over it. But he's not really. Men often experience emotional delay. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they often feel later, after the space sets in, after they notice the absence, after they realize the routine isn't the same. You're not just out of his life, you're out of his loop, out of his rhythm. And that disruption starts to echo inside him. And the more he thinks about it, the more confused he becomes, because he thought maybe he could move on easily. He thought maybe he wouldn't feel this way. But now the silence between you is speaking louder than your conversations ever did. And here's the kicker. He doesn't want you to know any of this. He wants to look in control. He wants to keep that mask of indifference, because admitting he's still thinking about you would mean admitting he's affected. And in his world, that feels like defeat. That feels like weakness. So instead, he puts up a front, a carefully curated image of, but in reality, he's checking your status updates, rereading old messages, wondering if you've truly moved on or if you're just as conflicted as he is. This constant loop of unspoken emotion creates tension. He wants to reach out, but his pride holds him back. He wants clarity, but fear of rejection keeps him silent. And through all of this, you're still on his mind. It's not just about missing you. It's about everything you represented. The connection, the comfort, the version of himself that existed when he was with you. That's hard to replace. And whether he'll admit it or not, part of him knows that. He's wrestling with his ego. He's weighing the risk of vulnerability against the comfort of staying guarded. That battle creates distance, and that distance breeds assumptions. He assumes you've moved on. You assume he doesn't care. But underneath all of that is a pile of unfinished thoughts, unsaid words, and emotions he hasn't made peace with. He thinks about you when he hears your favorite song, when he passes your favorite spot, when he sees someone who reminds him of you. These things linger, not because he's obsessed, but because he's still impacted. The truth is, the mind doesn't let go as quickly as people pretend it does. Just because he's not saying anything doesn't mean he's not thinking everything. You're still part of his mental landscape, whether he talks about it or not. He's just not ready to admit it, not to you, not to his friends, and in some cases, not even to himself. But the thoughts are there, quiet, persistent, real. He's not just sitting there completely unaffected by your silence. He's watching your every move just as much as you're watching his. The truth is, when you pull back, when you go quiet, when you stop showing up the way you used to, it triggers something in him. And even if you won't say it, even if he pretends it doesn't matter, he's paying attention. He might not be texting, calling, or reaching out directly, but that doesn't mean he's disconnected. Them on the other side, observing, testing, wondering what your silence means, and just as importantly, what you're going to do with it. People assume that the one who goes silent first holds the power, but it's more complex than that. When you pull back, he begins to question everything. The truth is, he might have been banking on the idea that you'd always be there, that no matter how distant he became, you'd eventually reach out. You text, you try to fix things, you chase some kind of closure or reconnection. That's what he's used to, maybe even what he depended on. But when you don't, when you hold the line and stay quiet, it unsettles him. He might act cool about it, play it off, pretend not to notice, but deep down the questions start forming quickly. Is she really done? Is she actually moving on? Why hasn't she said anything yet? His ego gets hit. And not because he's a narcissist or malicious, but because his sense of control starts to slip. We're all to some degree sensitive to change. And when someone who used to show up for us stops doing so, it forces us to evaluate what we might have taken for granted. What's more, he might start doing subtle things to test the waters, watching your stories, liking an old post, asking mutual friends about you, posting something vague that he knows you'll see. These little actions are his way of saying, I'm still here, without fully breaking the silence himself. It's a test, not always intentional, but it's a way to see if you'll bite. He's checking to see if the door is still cracked open. And if you don't respond, if you stay in your power and remain quiet, it tells him something louder than words ever could. The dynamic has shifted in his mind. Your silence becomes a mirror. He starts analyzing your patterns the way you once analyzed his. Every absence becomes a message. Every unviewed story, every ignored post, every missed call becomes a symbol of your change, your distance, your strength. This challenges him, especially if he was the one used to holding the emotional upper hand. When you don't react, when you stay still in your silence, it forces him to confront the consequences of his own behavior. And in that silence, he also begins to question himself. He rewinds the tape. He replays the last conversation. He thinks about what he could have said differently. And often, he won't admit it, not to you, not to his friends, maybe not even to himself, but the regret bubbles up. Because now it's not just about you being silent. It's about you showing him a version of yourself he didn't expect. One that can walk away, one that can hold boundaries, one that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. He realizes your silence is intentional, not passive. That you're not being quiet because you're weak. You're being quiet because you've said enough. And in a strange way, he starts to feel exposed, because when someone else pulls back and doesn't chase, the spotlight shifts. It forces him to examine why he expected that attention in the first place. It makes him realize that maybe he depended on your energy more than he thought. He may not admit any of this. He may still play it cool, but don't mistake his silence for lack of awareness. He knows you're quiet. He notices, he's watching, and whether he ever reaches out or not, he's being affected by the shift. Your silence is a signal. It tells him that things are different now, that the old version of you, the one who tolerated the hot and cold, the mixed signals, the emotional breadcrumbs, is gone. And that realization lands heavy, even if he never says a word. The act of pretending not to care is often easier than facing the truth. And that's what so many people don't understand when someone goes silent. For many men, it's not that they're completely over it or unaffected. It's that they've convinced themselves that this emotional detachment is what they need in order to protect themselves. Admitting that they care or that they're emotionally affected by a breakup or a shift in the relationship feels like losing control. And for someone who spent a lifetime avoiding vulnerability, admitting how deeply they're hurt or missing someone feels like a loss of strength. And when someone acts like they don't care, especially after a breakup or a difficult moment in a relationship, it's often a defense mechanism. To avoid feeling weak or exposed, it's a way of hiding from the vulnerability of admitting that they miss you, that they regret their actions, or that they've made a mistake. For a lot of men, the fear of vulnerability is one of the deepest emotional blocks. They've been conditioned to believe that showing emotional pain makes them weak. It makes them less than in the eyes of others. And so they create this hard exterior, this cold front of indifference, because it's more manageable. What many don't realize is that this I don't care act is a temporary shield. It's a coping mechanism that lasts only as long as it takes for them to come face to face with the truth. And that truth is this: they do care. They miss you. They regret how things went down. They wish they'd handled the situation differently. But acknowledging that would mean admitting their own flaws, their mistakes, and their vulnerability, and that's a difficult pill to swallow. The challenge with this act is that over time, it becomes less convincing. The more someone suppresses their true feelings, the more they begin to unravel in other ways. And while they might appear calm on the outside, internally, there's a whirlwind of confusion, regret, and self-doubt. They know the silence between the two of you isn't just about the moment. It's about everything that's gone unsaid. They might try to convince themselves that moving on is the best option, but the truth is they're still stuck in this emotional limbo. They're too afraid to reach out, too proud to admit that they miss you, and too unsure of how to make things right. This emotional avoidance also breeds insecurity. By refusing to acknowledge how much they care, they end up building walls around their own feelings, preventing any kind of resolution. So instead of confronting their emotions head on, they hold on to the belief that indifference is a form of strength. They put up a front to protect themselves. But in doing so, they fail to communicate what's really happening inside. They become trapped in their own version of reality, one that's built on a foundation of lies. Lies about not caring, lies about moving on, lies about how they really feel about you. The more they suppress these feelings, the more difficult it becomes to make sense of them. They start second-guessing their actions, wondering if they've made the right choice, wondering if they could have done things differently. But by then, it's too late to turn back the clock, and all they can do is stay in that state of emotional paralysis, hoping things will somehow resolve on their own. Meanwhile, their avoidance keeps them from doing the one thing that could actually heal the situation: being vulnerable, being honest, and admitting that they care. Pretending not to care also creates a sense of emotional dissonance. The longer they maintain this facade, the further they drift from their own emotional truth. And that's where the real danger lies. When they've convinced themselves they don't care, they lose touch with who they really are. They lose the ability to be honest with themselves. This emotional detachment becomes a habit, something that they resort to as a way of coping with discomfort. And over time, it becomes a part of their identity, the person who doesn't feel, the person who doesn't need anyone. But deep down, they know it's a lie. And sooner or later, that lie catches up with them. When someone is acting like they don't care, what's really happening is that they're overwhelmed by the fear of being vulnerable. They are, in fact, terrified of letting their guard down and exposing their emotions. It's not that they don't care about you or the relationship, they do, but their fear of how you might respond to that vulnerability, or worse, the fear of rejection, is so intense that they'd rather suppress everything they feel than take the risk of putting themselves out there. For many men, emotional vulnerability is like stepping into the unknown, a place they aren't familiar with and often avoid at all costs. It feels like a weakness, something they've been taught to guard against, something they've learned to hide behind a mask of indifference. The reality is, when someone pulls back and acts distant, it's a defense mechanism, a way of avoiding feelings they don't know how to handle. They don't want to be seen as emotionally needy or dependent. They don't want to show that they care too much because they think it will make them seem less strong, less in control. But the truth is, in the absence of emotional openness, they become trapped in a state of inner conflict. On the outside, they act like everything is fine, but inside, they're struggling with the overwhelming urge to reach out, to communicate, to express what's really going on beneath the surface. This internal struggle between wanting to connect and fearing rejection or being judged is paralyzing. It's not that they don't want to admit how they feel, it's that they don't know how to. The idea of being vulnerable, of allowing themselves to show emotion, is often seen as a form of surrender, a place where they feel exposed and powerless. So rather than acknowledging the pain of missing you or the frustration of the situation, they bury it, hoping that by pretending not to care, the feelings will go away. But of course they don't. The feelings remain, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be addressed. He may act like he doesn't care because he's trying to protect himself from the hurt, the vulnerability, and the potential for more emotional pain. It's an attempt to shield himself from feeling weak, from putting his heart on the line, only to have it rejected. But the truth is, this approach only prolongs the pain. Every time he refuses to confront his emotions and address what's really going on inside, he builds more walls around his heart. The more he suppresses his feelings, the harder it becomes to admit that he's still thinking about you, still affected by what's happening between the two of you. This fear of vulnerability can also come from past experiences. If he's been hurt before, if he's been betrayed or left behind in the past, the thought of opening up again can be terrifying. He might convince himself that if he doesn't care, then he won't get hurt. He might even convince himself that being indifferent is the best way to protect his heart. But in doing so, he's actually trapping himself in a cycle of emotional isolation. The walls he's built to protect himself only make it harder for him to experience true connection. And the longer he stays in this state of emotional shutdown, the more difficult it becomes for him to reconnect with his own feelings. When you pull back and stay silent, it creates a kind of emotional mirror. He's forced to confront his own fears and insecurities. The longer you don't react, the louder his internal dialogue becomes. He begins to question whether he's made a mistake, whether he's lost something valuable. The silence forces him to deal with the fact that he may have pushed you away, but he still has feelings for you. It may take him a while to process this, because in his mind, acknowledging these feelings means letting down his defenses. And that's not something he's ready to do just yet. He might never admit it to you, and he might even try to convince himself that he doesn't care. But deep down, the silence is driving him crazy. He's thinking about what he should have said, what he should have done, and what could have been different. And while he's pretending to be unaffected, he's slowly coming to terms with the fact that he can't escape what he feels for you. The longer he suppresses it, the more he starts to realize that this act of indifference is only temporary. The truth is, he's afraid of being vulnerable. He's afraid of showing you just how much you mean to him. And that fear keeps him from making the move he knows deep down he needs to make. To be honest, to open up, and to admit that he cares. So, while he acts like he doesn't care, what's really happening is that he's trying to protect himself from the very thing that would heal the situation, vulnerability. But in doing so, he's creating more distance, more confusion, and more unresolved emotions. When someone acts like they don't care, it's often because they are trying to manage their own emotional turmoil in the only way they know how, by shutting it down. But in reality, this emotional suppression is not as effective as it seems. What's actually happening is that the act of pretending to be indifferent is slowly eating away at him. He's trying to keep his emotions under control, but the more he pretends not to care, the more those feelings build up, becoming more intense and harder to ignore. It's a battle between his ego and his emotions. And the longer it goes on, the more he risks losing the very thing he's trying to protect, his own peace of mind. The thing about pretending not to care is that it creates an internal disconnect. The more he tells himself that he doesn't care, the more disconnected he becomes from his true feelings. He might convince himself that being indifferent is a way to protect himself from the pain of vulnerability. But in reality, it only makes it worse. The emotional weight of his unspoken thoughts grows heavier with every day that he doesn't acknowledge them. By shutting down, he's creating a wall that prevents him from truly processing his emotions. And over time, that wall becomes harder to break down. The emotional energy required to maintain this facade of indifference is draining. It takes a lot of effort to keep pretending that nothing bothers him, to act like he doesn't care when deep down he knows he does. This constant suppression of his feelings starts to affect him in ways he might not even fully understand. He might feel distracted, agitated, or confused. He might experience a sense of emptiness or loss, but he won't connect it to the fact that he's not dealing with the emotions that are truly affecting him. He might mask these feelings with other distractions, work, hobbies, or social events, but the reality is these emotions are still there, lurking beneath the surface. The more he denies how much he's affected by the situation, the more it begins to seep into his daily life. His mind is constantly preoccupied with thoughts of you and the relationship, and no amount of pretending can change that. Even if he's not outwardly acknowledging it, he's replaying past moments in his head. He's thinking about what went wrong, what could have been different, and wondering if there's any chance of repairing things. His actions might suggest that he's moved on, but inside he's constantly revisiting the past, trying to make sense of what happened. This constant emotional strain takes its toll. The longer he stays in this state of pretending, the more he risks emotional burnout. By holding everything in, he's not only blocking himself from healing, but he's also preventing the possibility of growth and resolution. His inability to confront his true feelings keeps him stuck in an emotional loop. He might keep telling himself that he's fine, that he doesn't need to acknowledge his feelings, but the truth is this avoidance only prolongs the pain. In the silence, his emotions are festering, and the longer he remains silent, the more he becomes consumed by them. At the same time, pretending not to care also isolates him. He's creating distance between himself and the people who care about him. Not just you, but his friends, his family, and anyone who might be able to offer him support. The wall he's building to protect himself from emotional pain is also keeping him from meaningful connections with others. He might not realize it, but by refusing to be honest about what's going on inside, he's cutting himself off from the possibility of healing and understanding. And because he's not talking about what he's feeling, he's not able to process his thoughts in a healthy way. The more he isolates himself, the more trapped he becomes in his own confusion. He might start to notice that things aren't as easy as they once were. His energy is low, his focus is scattered. The sense of relief he's been searching for by pretending everything's fine never quite materializes. Instead, he's left with a growing realization that denying his feelings is causing him more harm than good. The truth is, when he acts like he doesn't care, he's not just pushing you away, he's pushing himself away from the opportunity for growth, understanding, and ultimately peace. Eventually, he will be faced with a decision